So, yeah, I'm not even gonna hold you. This one's been a long time coming. Where do I even start? On one hand, I've had this video on the back burner ever since I started the channel, due in part to my love of TTRPGs and fantasy as a whole, but at the same time, I also like superheroes and Star Wars, so yeah, if you guys have been around either of those two things with the past few years, you already know I'm gonna be going with this. Anyway, if you've engaged with any piece of media before in your life, whether it be a movie, show, book, video game, or anything else for that matter, you've likely questioned the logistics of it. Fantasy, and if you're being honest, storytelling as a whole relies on some level of the suspension of disbelief to function. Sure, no one can shoot lightning from the hands of real life, but in Star Wars, we can move things with the mind, see the future, do backflips or flying some of a weapon capable of slicing metal like a 1,000-degree knife through wet paper towel, so yeah, lightning hands wouldn't be too far out of the question. Still though, despite the importance of spinning one's disbelief, a good story needs some sense of internal logic for it to be functional. Notice how I said logic and not realism. People often equate the two, and while I can see why people can come to the conclusion because of the overlap, the two aren't mutually inclusive. Realism, simply put, is the practice of adding things to their story and having them function as they would in real life. Logic, on the other hand, is just something making sense within the context it exists in. Magic, for example, is inherently unrealistic. However, with enough logic, you can make your audience go, yeah, that makes sense, so they don't question it, resulting in the illusion of realism, which is to kind of be expected. Like, if you're telling someone a story, you want that to be as convincing as possible, right? But that's where the problems start to come up. Because of this, some people start to confuse the fictional world's internal logic with real-life regular logic. I've seen this phenomenon happen most in fantasy, particularly in settings based off the Western kind, so Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, most D&D settings, and so on and so forth, though genres like sci-fi and anything else that involves superheroes are pretty popular examples of this. Why that is exactly varies heavily from person to person, but if I had to blame it on one exact thing, I'd like to blame it on people like knowing things, and because of that, people like feeling like they know something. Come on, there's a reason why we evolve with mental capacity to do anything creative to begin with. Making stuff is fun, but in order to make stuff, you have to know how that stuff works. So, when you don't know how a fantasy setting or any fictional setting in general for that matter works, people tend to fall back on what they know as a baseline, and that baseline tends to be realism because, we live in real life. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but really, it all lies in why you ask. If something genuinely catches your interest and you want to know more about the niche parts of a story you like's world and how it functions, you're not the kind of person I'm going to be complaining about. If anything, applying a touch of realism to fill in the gaps left behind by the author can do a lot to add depth to an already great story. However, some people are just pretentious. You know the type. You know exactly the type I'm talking about. That one guy who actually pokes holes in the story wherever they can for some ulterior motive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe they want to prove their superiority as a writer. Maybe they don't like the direction the story is going. Maybe they misinterpreted the point the writer is trying to get across. Or maybe just racist something. You know how people can be these days. In particular, the people clamoring for realism and fantasy tend to do so for the following reasons. Reason number 1. The fight scenes feel too extravagant and not based enough on actual fighting principles, which all things considered is actually a pretty reasonable complaint. You know me, I love violence. I actually love violence so much I spent almost an entire hour yapping about characters who've cast aside the entire power system of their respective series just to beat the crap out of people the old-fashioned way, and another one on choreography, which I actually kind of want to remake, so I'll hold off on that for now. That said, I do feel like while this crowd has a point, it tends to really depend on the story. In the case of series who is supposed to be more grounded, choreography is an especially big part in some of the importance of fights. That isn't to say the same isn't true for stories less grounded in reality. If anything, I stand by my belief that a good fight scene can stand on its own as its own self-contained narrative, but in the case of more grounded series, the stakes are often much higher because there's no magic to heal you if you get stabbed. Because of this, every move needs to have weight, purpose, and some form of thought put behind them, otherwise you risk breaking the suspension of disbelief. For example, if you watch enough sword fights in movies, and by sword fights, I really mean any fight between two or more people wielding bladed weapons, you know that sometimes instead of having a clear target, they just go for the weapon over and over again while spinning and hitting flips. On one hand, I do understand where these people are coming from. If you're rounding a fight scene, it's only natural to have people fight the way they realistically would if they found themselves in that situation. But on the other hand, there are a number of other factors that impact how a fight scene is portrayed outside of just practicality. While it isn't as much of a problem outside of television and movies, like in other mediums such as writing, comics, and manga, it's easy to keep things more interesting via things such as internal monologues, and in the case of the latter two, dynamic angles and stylization, filming a fight scene of actual people in it is an entirely different beast. The thing about martial arts, especially weapon-based ones, is that they're called martial arts for a reason. They were actually used against people at one point or another, and as it happens, effectiveness doesn't automatically equate to aesthetic. I'm not saying it's impossible to have a good, realistic, and grounded fight scene, but it can be really difficult to have one while also making sure the audience knows what's going on too. So what the actors do to counter this? They sell their attacks, they wind their weapons back really far, hit spin moves, they do anything they can to keep the audience attention and at least make sure it's somewhat easy for them to track. Not to mention, when people say that certain maneuvers would be unrealistic, we also need to consider that these are works of fiction with their own rules. Rules which are often more, and I mean much more lenient than what we have to deal with in real life. Yeah, there's a lot of flips and Star Wars fights, but consider the following. When you're a space wizard with superpowers and the ability to see the future, and you fight another space wizard with superpowers and the ability to see the future, why wouldn't you go all out? The only way to beat a guy who can see into the future is to overwhelm them so they're too distracted and effectively predict what you're about to do. And if that means hitting a backflip every 10 seconds, well, hey, I guess I just gotta do it. Of course, it'd be impractical for a regular guy to be doing all this stuff in the fight. That's why the people doing it aren't regular guys. Sometimes shit really doesn't need to make sense, and that's okay. But there's a difference between pointing out a genuine flaw in something and doing pedantics for the sake of pedantics. But that's enough of that for now. Let's move on to reason 2. Bigotry. It's just straight up bigotry. What else did you expect? I'm talking racism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, sexism. I can go on for days, but the crowd I'm talking about, they tend to use historical accuracy as a means to cover their dislike of minority groups being represented in media. Please note, because I don't want any of this being taken out of context, we're talking about fancy things where real-world history does not apply. Yeah, I found that a lot of the time, people online can accept dragons, time travel, and magic, but draw the line at the black person and someone with disability getting in on the action too. Some people are more open about the fact they don't want the big media woken all over the place, transing their kids as gender, making them commit the cardinal sin of caring about other people who look different, and other people tend to be a little more subtle about it, using escapism of the day's political landscape as an excuse, which on paper doesn't seem too innocuous, but that's the thing. Those people often politicize the mere existence of minority groups, therefore, when those people receive representation in the stories they consume, they become political by proxy. Now, let me put you on game. If a person believes the existence of an entire group of people is inherently political, what do you think that applies about them as a whole? What do you think when someone states that existing while black, or while gay, or while trans, or God forbid, while disabled is an inherently political act? Just saying. In other news, while it is true that in certain settings, the magic and healthcare available would likely be enough to offset the effects of, if not cure some disabilities, but that isn't the case with all of them. Again, regardless if something is realistic, we also need to take our theory of intent and the intended logic of a series into account before drawing any conclusions. So sure, healing magic may exist, but what constitutes as an injury? If healing magic can only heal the wounded, would those born with certain disabilities be counted as wounded, or are they not because they were born with the disability? Let's say that hypothetically in this imaginary setting, healing magic works by reminding the body to a state where it wasn't injured. Had someone's spine been damaged in a fight, it will make sense to use healing magic to cure that paralysis. However, if someone was born without the function of their legs, there would be no able-bodied state to return to because they could never use their legs to begin with. Therefore, this specific brand of healing magic would not work in this scenario. We also need to consider the thematic reason as to why our characters are disabled to begin with. Would Ed and Al from Fullmetal Alchemist be nearly as compelling had Ed not lost his arm trying to bring back his mother and lost his leg to bind Al's soul to a suit of armor? Of course not. The disabilities are fundamental parts of their character arcs, and if you remove them, there goes half the story. All that aside, I do think that completely hand-waving disabilities out of the story with healing magic or anything else along those lines is a bit of a cop-out. Things such as stakes and permanent consequences of characters' actions aside, fantasy is the name of the genre. Why not have some fun with it? Oh, this old guy with a sword walks around with a cane. Why does he do that? Do you fight someone really strong? Is the cane a weapon too? Is it something they've always had to live with? Are they just that old? Who knows? Oh, that wizard's in a wheelchair. Maybe it has like, I don't know, cool spider legs or something. Realism threw itself out the window the second the giant flying reptile that can shoot magma out of his face showed up. That's the appeal of fantasy, how creating something as a whole, as long as you make it make sense within the confines of the story, you can make whatever the hell you want happen. So what if Yasuke is one of the new protagonists in the new Assassin's Creed game coming out? This is the same series where the Catholic Church tried to use the ancient superweapon to take over the Earth, and you play as people trying to take down the evil video game corporation by using the memories of your ancestors and other historical figures. As far as I'm concerned, I'm surprised it hasn't been a game with the feel that Mount Rushmore is actually an inside job by the Templars to steal an ancient artifact hidden somewhere on native land. The point I'm trying to make here is, with these people, it was never about suspension of disbelief or escapism to begin with, but rather, them not liking things being different than how they used to be, which leads us to our next point. What even is escapism? As you can probably tell due to the name, escapism is a process in which someone indulges in certain habits in order to have an escape from their problems. And now, especially more than ever, people tend to do so through the consumption of media, resulting in what we know as fandom culture. Of course, fandoms aren't an inherently bad thing, and at their core, the idea of a community of people who all like the same thing is a concept as old as socialization itself. But we all know what happens when a fan group gets too big. Eventually, there's gonna be that one guy you don't really like, but they seem to get along with everyone else, but you don't want to seem mean, so you just kind of tolerate their existence, even though just being around them kind of pisses you off. Imagine that but multiplied by 5,000, because this time you don't even have to know them personally, you just kind of run into them sometimes. I can go on about how some level of gatekeeping is necessary in order to keep weirdos out and maintain a helping fandom, but since this isn't a video on gatekeeping, I might elaborate further on that in the future vid. I got a lot of stuff to complain about. Anyway, back to escapism. Due to its nature, it's not uncommon for people to form deep emotional attachments to their favorite shows, movies, games, comics, and anything else of the sort. So, of course, when they see something they enjoy is going in a direction they don't particularly like, a little disappointment would be natural. But at the same time, after getting attached to something so long, there's always the risk of forming that sense of entitlement. 2 or 3. Now, I don't know if it's an exact term for outside of just entitlement, but if I had to compare it to anything else, I feel that fandom culture, as you know, has made it easier than ever for people to form parasocial relationships to their favorite properties. For those of you who don't know, a parasocial relationship is a one-sided relationship wherein one person feels a deep and personal attachment to someone who doesn't even know they exist. The para part of parasocial being derived from the word parasitic. While the term itself is pretty new, the concept's been around for ages, and more likely than not, you've seen it in action at least once. You know, the people who are a little too obsessed with their favorite actors, musicians, and more recently, content creators, the kind of people who get jealous when their favorite YouTuber gets a new partner and are personally offended when something comes up in their life so they don't have the time to upload this consistently. Now, I make no illusion as to what kind of person I am, and if you're like me and you were part of a Sonic fan for a while, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's only natural to want the best for the people and things you care about, but in the case of media, we have to accept that in the end, the vast majority of us have no power over what happens because, well, we didn't make it. Now, we can get attached, form bonds for other people due to a shared appreciation or something, pay tribute to it through things like fan art, and support the creators however we can, but, like, in the end, there's really nothing we can do to change it. There's things like fanfiction, there's nothing stopping you from making your own thing, but in the end, it's never going to be the original, and unfortunately, that's also true for the original thing itself. Change is the natural state of all things. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's obvious, but no matter what, nothing stays the same forever, and sometimes people just take offense to it. This is a problem in itself, but let's just say a parasocial relationship with something plus certain pre-existing beliefs equal absolute catastrophe when mixed together. Like I said earlier, fiction requires the suspension of disbelief, and when a person's version of escapism requires the exclusion of a marginalized group of people, that suspension tends to break pretty fast. Now, to most people who fall out of love with things they used to love in the past, the next logical step would be to accept that that thing just isn't for you anymore and move on. Unfortunately, however, that's where the parasocial aspect comes in. People, in their entitlement, have this belief that the changing times are forcing their favorite properties to change in order to stay relevant, and to an extent, that's not necessarily wrong, but not because woke is trying to ruin storytelling as we know it. Like, of course, things like tokenism and rainbow capitalism exist for a reason. No one likes a character that exists solely for the creators to pat themselves on the back, but let's be real here, the notion that the mere existence of any marginalized group in a story being immediately quote-unquote in your face about it is kinda fucked up, not gonna lie. I nearly fell into the trap of being one of those people myself, but you know, I ended up being gay. And even if I wasn't, I'm not white, so listen, you do the math, I would not have survived the alt-line pipeline if I stayed down that path in middle school. Tangents about unsupervised internet access aside, people are complaining about how the newer generation for forever now, so it's not like any of this is anything new, but it has gotten worse, though. We can at least agree on that, right? I don't know exactly what changed, but it probably has something to do with the ever-growing presence of social media in our lives, and the certain election of a US president emboldening people to be more upfront about the more unsavory beliefs. And because of that safety, they've become so poisoned by their own hatred of other people and things they don't like, they don't know how to enjoy anything without bringing up some form of cultural war bullshit. Ironically, by claiming they use fiction as a means of escape from reality, they in turn become the ones that drag real life into fiction. Think of it like those guys say pause even after anything tangentially gay sounding. The same goes to people who keep saying that as men, people shouldn't be able to do certain things even though they're really inconsequential in the long run. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's funny, but most of the time, they just be reached for no reason. You can't even eat the hot dog these days without somebody going, "Hey, yo!" The same way people be saying that as a man you can't wear shorts, or you can't wear glasses, or you can't even drink peak lemonade without being a little fruity, you got people saying that you can't have people of color in stores without contributing some grand scheme where every minority is banding together to eventually erase the white race from existence. Or, you got people saying that trans people neurodivergency isn't a real thing. Disabled people wouldn't exist in any fictional setting without instantly dying, despite the fact they existed in the past too. Or, people claim that the Third Reich was actually a bad thing is somehow a hot take. And why? I don't know, man. Art is... it's weird. Weird and messy, and that's because we, as a people, are weird and messy too. All art is a product of the creator, intentional or not. The beliefs they hold and the lessons they've learned in life always bleed into their work somehow. And as fun as escapism can be, you can't really truly escape reality because we live in it. You can distract yourself from it, sure, but eventually, you're gonna have to put that book down. You're gonna have to turn off the TV, put down the controller, close the laptop, or whatever else you gotta do, because at some point, you need to do something else. And really, since all fiction is still a product of reality, you're bound to see some realism leak into something you read, because that's just how things are. What matters is your mindset. You can either get over the times, accept the change, or at the very least, accept that not everything is going to be for you, or You can yap and hate because you don't like how something turned out, even though you probably have better things to be doing with your time. Fun. When was the last time you had fun? It's not like the word's completely joyless now, but still, with the current state of things, it's reasonable, hell, dare I say rational, at least have some worry in your system, but if you let everything constantly wear at you, eventually you're gonna crack. And that's why we have escapism. People need a break from all the bullshit. It's just that some people use escapism as an excuse to complain about things they don't like and stay completely stagnant. But in the words of the great Reagan-era talk from Rap Psycho, how do you expect to change reality if you don't even want to live in it? Those same people who get so caught up about things being unrealistic, they're also so caught up with other dogmas being peddled to them that they've been disconnected from reality for years now. Twilight varies from person to person, and really, it is sad to watch, but in the end, there's only so much you can do to change someone's mind. Some people, they see the flaws when you point them out, and others, they just gotta learn by themselves. It's not that fun is dead, that's title's mostly there because I needed something to catch your attention, but it does feel like it's harder to come by. What with the affirmation culture word garbage I keep yapping about, you have a going commodification of art and entertainment. We're not necessarily having less fun, but rather, we also have a lot more to worry about, but really, who's to say? These past couple of videos are supposed to be something short and might get me back to the swing of things after weekly uploads in June, but yeah, I got a little too ambitious, what can I say? Maybe I have better luck next time, who knows, but since it's all I got for now, thank you for coming, thank you for staying, and thank you for watching the show. Take care of yourself, peace. Also like and sub, I can really use the help.